He smirked and told the room, "This is Maria, my maid. She just helps around the house." While she stood there swallowing the shame, people laughed. Cameras flashed. Then the Don walked in, silver-haired and commanding, his presence silencing the room like a judge entering court. He glanced at her with eyes that had witnessed empires rise and fall, and said one sentence that froze Clifford's blood. Because the maid he mocked was not just any woman. She was Benedetta Maria Teresi, goddaughter of Salvatore, the architect Teresi, the most powerful mafia boss in the Northeast. The woman whose father had built an empire before his death. The princess of a crime family that controlled half the city's real estate, construction, and waterfront operations. And Clifford, mid-level associate at Teresi Holdings, had just disrespected the Don's goddaughter in front of the entire family. His whole life was about to crack in public. Please sit back, relax, as we dive fully into this remarkable story. Clifford Romano sat at his desk in the cramped Queen's apartment, staring at the email glowing on his laptop screen as if it were a ticket to another life. Teresi Holdings' annual black tie gala. Invitation only. Formal attire required. The Plaza Hotel, Manhattan. His pulse quickened. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. 3 years of late nights, forced laughter at office jokes, and endless pretending to be one of them had finally paid off. An invitation to the Teresi Gala meant he was being noticed. And in Clifford's world, being noticed was everything, especially by a family like the Teresis. Everyone in New York knew the name. Old money, older power, the kind of family that had poured concrete for half the city's skyline and controlled the other half through means people whispered about but never discussed openly. Legitimate businesses on paper. Respect earned through legacy and fear. Clifford had worked at Teresi Holdings for 3 years, managing mid-level property acquisitions. He knew the company's reputation. He knew the whispers. But he had convinced himself that if he worked hard enough, smiled bright enough, he could climb into their world. "Maria," he called out, his voice echoing through their small but tidy apartment. The smell of jollof rice drifted from the kitchen, the soft hum of gospel music underscoring the domestic calm. She appeared a moment later, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her dark hair was pulled into a simple bun, her face free of makeup, natural beauty that needed no enhancement. Warm brown eyes, olive skin that seemed to glow even in dim light, and a quiet grace that had first drawn him to her years ago. "Yes, honey." Clifford turned his laptop toward her, grinning. "Look at this. The Teresi Gala. They invited me. You know what this means?" She smiled, genuinely happy for him. "It means they're recognizing your hard work." He nodded, but corrected her quickly. "It means I'm finally being seen, Maria, by the right people. The Teresi family doesn't invite just anyone. This is the inner circle." She walked closer, peering at the elegant invitation design. Gold lettering on black cardstock. Expensive, exclusive. The Teresi family crest embossed at the top, a lion holding scales. "It looks fancy. I suppose you'll need a tuxedo. And you'll come with me," he added, already picturing the night. "It's a couple's event. Everyone brings their wives." Maria blinked. "Me? Of course." But then his tone shifted just slightly, like a door closing. But don't overdo it," he said casually, reaching for his coffee mug. "You know how these old family types are. Traditional. I don't want them thinking I'm out of place." She tilted her head. "Out of place." He sighed, setting the mug down. You know what I mean? Just something simple, modest. You always look good when you keep it low-key. Her chest tightened. It wasn't the first time he'd said something like that. Maria had learned to translate his words over the years. Modest meant, don't embarrass me. Low-key meant, don't outshine me. All right, she said softly. Something simple. As she turned to leave, Clifford's voice followed her like a hand, pulling her back. And Maria, when we get there, if anyone asks, just play along if I introduce you differently. Some of them are high society, old family circles. Italian traditions, you know. I can't explain everything about us in one night. Her steps slowed. Differently? What does that mean? He waved dismissively. Nothing serious. Maybe I'll say you help with things at home, just until they get to know me better. It's a formality. Business etiquette. Maria stared at him. Her voice remained calm, but there was a tremor beneath it. You mean tell people I'm your maid? Clifford's expression hardened, irritation flashing across his face. Don't make it sound dramatic. It's just business etiquette, Maria. These people are judgmental. You wouldn't understand how these family circles work. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her tone even. I understand respect, Clifford, and pretending I'm your maid doesn't sound like respect. He sighed impatiently, standing now, his body language closing off. Maria, can you not make this a thing? Just one night. I'm trying to build a future for us. Once I'm promoted, once I'm in the inner circle, everything will change. You'll see. Her silence lingered between them. The gospel music in the background seemed to hush, as if even the song knew something was breaking. Finally, she nodded. If that's what you need. He smiled, relief washing over him like he'd just dodged a bullet. That's my girl. Later that night, Maria lay awake beside him. His steady breathing filled the dark room, peaceful, unburdened. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about how easily he had said it, how small he made her sound, how comfortable he was with making her invisible. Once, Clifford had loved her simplicity. Now it seemed to embarrass him. She whispered to herself in Italian, a language she rarely spoke aloud anymore. Mi vedrai un giorno, Clifford, per quello che sono veramente. You'll see me one day, Clifford, for who I really am. But he was already asleep, dreaming of chandeliers and applause, of shaking hands with men whose respect he craved more than her love. The following week was a blur of preparation. Clifford bought a new tuxedo from a boutique in Brooklyn, spent hours polishing his shoes until they gleamed, rehearsed his introduction speech in the bathroom mirror, and researched every senior associate's background at Torrisi Holdings. He studied Mr. Salvatore Torrisi's biography online. The man was a legend. 72 years old, silver-haired, sharp as a blade. He had built Torrisi Holdings from the ground up in the 1970s, transforming it into one of the most powerful real estate empires in the Northeast. The articles were careful. They mentioned his philanthropy, his donations to hospitals and churches, his support for Italian-American cultural centers. But between the lines, everyone knew the Torrisi family wasn't just about real estate. They were family in the old sense, the kind where loyalty was currency and betrayal was paid for in blood. Clifford told himself he didn't care about the whispers. He wanted the legitimacy, the respect, the access. He wanted to be close to power. Maria quietly ironed his clothes, folded his shirts, and watched him rehearse. When she brought up what she might wear, he didn't even look up from his mirror. Something decent. Maybe that beige dress from church. The long one. Simple. Clean. She nodded and walked away, her footsteps soft on the hardwood floor. 3 days before the gala, Clifford came home excited, waving his phone. Maria, guess what? She looked up from the stove where she was stirring pasta. What is it? Mr. Teresi's assistant called me personally. She said Mr. Teresi himself wanted to confirm I'd be attending. Can you believe that? The Don himself is keeping track of who's coming. Maria's hand paused briefly on the spoon. Her face remained calm. That's good, Clifford. Good? It's incredible. He paced the kitchen, energy pouring off him. This means I'm on his radar. This is how you move up, Maria. You get noticed by the top. She turned back to the stove. Just remember to be yourself. Clifford laughed. Be myself? Maria, nobody gets ahead by being themselves. You become who they need you to be. She said nothing, but inside something old stirred. A memory of her own father's voice, deep and steady, telling her as a girl, Benedetta, respect is not performed. It is lived, and those who perform it will always be exposed. Her father, Giacomo Teresi, had been Salvatore's younger brother, a man of honor, a man of principle. He had died when Maria was 16, killed in a construction accident that everyone whispered wasn't an accident at all. A rival family. A message sent. Salvatore had raised her after that, not as a burden, but as his own. He had no children of his own, and Maria became the daughter of his heart. He taught her the business, the language of power, the way empires were built on loyalty and lost through arrogance. But when her mother fell ill years later, Maria had stepped away. She had chosen care over power, love over legacy. And when her mother died, she had chosen quiet grief over public mourning. That's when she met Clifford, at a community center in Queens where she volunteered, trying to feel normal again. He had been there for corporate service hours, uncomfortable in his cheap tie, but kind enough to carry boxes and smile at the elderly women. She had thought he was genuine. She had thought he saw her. Now, standing in their kitchen, listening to him rehearse his fake confidence, she realized he had never really looked at her at all. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear. Rain had threatened earlier in the week, but never fell. The city sparkled under a sharp November sky. Maria stood by the door in a sleek cream dress she had chosen carefully. Not expensive, but elegant. Her natural curls were pinned neatly, small gold earrings catching the light. Simple, dignified. Clifford looked her over briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. Not bad, he said, straightening his bow tie in the hallway mirror. Let's go. She smiled faintly. Thank you. The drive to Manhattan was long and quiet. The city glittered in the distance, lights bouncing off glass towers, the skyline a monument to ambition. Maria looked out the window, her thoughts distant, her hands folded in her lap. Clifford rehearsed under his breath, his confidence swelling with every mile closer to the plaza. He didn't notice the way Maria clutched her hands together, or the way her breathing had slowed into something deliberate and controlled. When they arrived, cameras flashed at the entrance. Valets in black uniforms opened car doors with precision. Laughter, champagne, silk gowns, tailored tuxedos. It was another world. Clifford adjusted his tie, his chest puffing slightly. Remember what I said, he whispered as they walked toward the entrance. Smile. Stay polite. Don't draw attention. She nodded. Of course. He offered her his arm briefly, then withdrew it halfway when a group of colleagues waved at him from across the red carpet. Clifford, one of them called, grinning. Clifford grinned back and walked ahead, leaving Maria a step behind. She followed quietly, her heels clicking softly against the marble steps. Her face remained calm, but inside, she felt the old armor sliding into place. The armor her uncle had taught her to wear. The armor of a Torisi. Inside, the grand ballroom of the plaza shimmered with gold and white. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. A live band played soft jazz. Waiters in black and white uniforms glided between tables carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Maria's breath caught, not at the luxury, but at the familiar faces. She recognized several men from her uncle's inner circle. Older men in expensive suits, their wives dripping in diamonds, their eyes sharp and watchful. She kept her head down, her posture modest. Not yet, not yet. Clifford blended in easily, his laughter louder than usual, his handshakes firm and eager. When a coworker asked who the lovely lady was beside him, he chuckled and said, "Oh, Maria. She helps me keep things together at home. My little house manager." The men laughed politely. Maria's smile stayed fixed, but her heart cracked silently. She excused herself for a moment, walking toward the refreshment area near the tall windows overlooking Central Park. As she passed a mirror, she caught her reflection. Elegant, but small in a world built on appearances. And somewhere deep down, something began to awaken. The evening unfolded like a play Clifford thought he was starring in. He floated from group to group, shaking hands, exaggerating his importance in projects, name-dropping senior associates, and pretending he belonged. Maria remained mostly on the sidelines, sipping sparkling water and observing. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't jealous. She was simply detached, like someone watching a movie she'd already seen. At one point, a young woman with pearl earrings approached her near the champagne table. "Excuse me," she said kindly. "I couldn't help but notice your necklace. It's beautiful." Maria's hand went instinctively to the small gold cross at her throat. It had been her father's gift to her mother. After her mother's death, Maria had worn it every day. "Thank you. It was a gift from my late mother." The woman's eyes softened. "I'm sorry for your loss. I'm Lydia, by the way." Maria. They chatted briefly, and Lydia couldn't hide her surprise at Maria's eloquence. Her diction was clear, her thoughts organized, her presence warm but composed. "Are you in real estate too?" Lydia asked. Maria laughed softly. "You could say I'm familiar with the industry." Meanwhile, across the room, Clifford was trying to impress a senior partner named Vincent Calabrese, a man in his 60s with slick-back gray hair and a reputation for seeing through bullshit. "I've been working closely on the Lower Manhattan expansion," Clifford boasted, leaning in conspiratorially. "It's my proposal that really pushed things forward." Vincent raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Really? Interesting. I thought Mr. Teresi mentioned someone else was advising on that. Someone with international property law experience." Clifford waved it off, forcing a laugh. "I probably contributed more behind the scenes. You know how it is." Vincent chuckled dryly and walked away without another word. Clifford turned, irritation flashing across his face. He spotted Maria chatting comfortably with Lydia and a few other women near the windows. For some reason, seeing her relaxed and engaged irritated him even more. He walked over, placing a heavy hand on Maria's shoulder. "Sweetheart, can you grab me another drink?" Her smile faded slightly, but she nodded. "Of course." She excused herself and left. As she walked away, one of the women whispered to Lydia, She's so graceful. Is she really just his house help? Clifford forced a laugh, leaning in. Ah, she just helps around the house, you know. Keeps things organized. Simple life, simple girl. The women exchanged glances, but said nothing. When Maria returned with a drink, she overheard the tail end of Clifford's conversation. She set the glass down carefully on the table beside him. Your drink, she said, her voice neutral, controlled. He looked up, startled by the chill in her tone. Thanks, babe. She turned and walked toward the corner near the terrace doors, her eyes glistening briefly before she blinked the emotion away. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have treasured you? Later, during dinner, the waiters began serving. The aroma of roasted chicken, garlic, and fresh herbs filled the air. Clifford laughed too loudly at every joke, his insecurity becoming a full performance. Clifford, one colleague teased, "You're on fire tonight. You'd think you own the place." He grinned wide. Maybe one day I will. Maria's gaze drifted toward the stage at the front of the ballroom. The Teresi family crest hung behind the podium, gold and crimson, the lion holding scales. She knew that crest. She had grown up with it embroidered on her father's handkerchiefs, carved into the gates of her uncle's estate. Then the energy in the room shifted. The double doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and the conversations dimmed like someone had turned down the volume on the world. Mr. Salvatore Torrisi entered, tall for his age, silver-haired, with a face that carried the weight of decades. His tuxedo was impeccable, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The room bent toward him like gravity. Everyone rose slightly, a sign of respect that wasn't discussed but understood. Clifford nearly tripped in his haste to position himself near the center aisle. Mr. Teresi, he said, voice too loud, too eager. An honor, sir. Salvatore's eyes landed on him briefly, a slight smile touching his lips. Good evening, Clifford. Enjoying yourself? Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. This is incredible. Thank you for the invitation. Salvatore nodded once. Then his gaze moved past Clifford. His eyes found Maria, standing quietly near the terrace doors, her hands folded, her posture calm. Their eyes met. For just a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, a silent conversation that had been waiting for years. Salvatore's expression softened, just barely. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Maria inclined her head respectfully, her lips forming the faintest smile. Then Salvatore continued forward, his entourage of men in dark suits following like shadows. Clifford exhaled, shaking his head, grinning like a fool. You see that? You spoke to me. That's what I mean, Maria. Moments like that. Career-changing. Maria said nothing. She simply turned back toward the window, looking out at the glittering city below. But inside, her heart was steady, calm, prepared, because she knew what was coming next. As the music resumed, couples began to move toward the dance floor. A slow waltz filled the ballroom, elegant and timeless. Clifford asked a co-worker's wife to dance instead of Maria, claiming she was too shy for these things. Maria stood by the terrace doors, looking out at the night sky. She wasn't angry anymore, just sad. Sad for what he had become. The man who once held her hand at bus stops, now danced for validation from strangers. When she turned back toward the room, she found Salvatore Torrisi watching her from across the ballroom. He stood near the bar, a glass of whiskey in hand, his expression unreadable. He smiled faintly. Then his assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, approached and whispered something in his ear. Maria caught a fragment of the whisper. Equi, è pronta. She's here. She's ready. Salvatore nodded. Good. Clifford remained oblivious, too busy laughing too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, too busy chasing approval like a dog chasing cars. The night deepened. The music mellowed. Conversations grew more intimate, more wine-soaked. Maria had retreated to a quieter corner near the grand staircase, preferring silence to shallow chatter. But even there, whispers found her. That's her, someone murmured behind a champagne flute. The one Clifford said is his maid. Another voice replied, quieter. Maid? She carries herself better than half these women. Look at her posture. That's old-world elegance. Maria kept her composure, though each word stung like a paper cut. Small, sharp, cumulative. At a nearby table, Clifford was mid-conversation with Vincent Calabrese again, desperately trying to recover from his earlier misstep. You'll see, Mr. Calabrese, Clifford said confidently, leaning forward. I'm ready for bigger responsibilities. I've proven my loyalty to the family, to the business. Vincent leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. Loyalty is good, Clifford, but so is humility. And respect, especially respect. Clifford forced a smile, his jaw tight. Of course, sir. I respect everyone here. Vincent's eyes flicked briefly toward Maria, then back to Clifford. Do you? Before Clifford could answer, a hush swept across the room like a wave pulling back before a tsunami. Salvatore Teresi had taken the stage. The conversation stopped. The laughter died. Even a band paused mid-note. All eyes turned toward the podium where the Don stood, silver-haired and commanding, his presence filling the room like a storm filling the sky. Ladies and gentlemen, Salvatore began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the ballroom. Thank you for being here tonight. For those of you who know me, you know I don't speak often. But when I do, it matters. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Clifford clapped enthusiastically, certain this was the moment he'd been waiting for. The moment where the Don would announce new leadership, new opportunities. Salvatore continued, his voice steady and deliberate. This company, this family was built on loyalty, on respect, on the understanding that power without honor is nothing but noise. Heads nodded, murmurs of agreement. Tonight, before we begin our awards, I want to acknowledge someone whose vision and integrity have shaped this company's future in ways most of you will never see. Clifford's heart pounded. He sat straighter, preparing himself. Salvatore's eyes swept the room, then landed on Maria. His expression softened just slightly. Tonight, I'm honored to introduce the woman who has been advising this company's international expansion, who has restructured our ethics policies, who has turned down public recognition for years because she values results over applause. The room was silent. Clifford's hands froze mid-clap. Salvatore smiled. My goddaughter, Benedetta Maria Torrisi. The room erupted in gasps. Heads turned, eyes widened. Clifford's breath caught in his throat. Maria rose gracefully from her seat near the staircase. Her cream dress flowed under the chandeliers, her posture regal, her face calm and composed. Every step she took toward the stage echoed through Clifford's disbelief. No, he whispered. No, no, no. Maria walked up the steps to the stage, her movements unhurried, confident. Salvatore extended his hand, and she took it, standing beside him like she had always belonged there. On stage, she took the microphone from the stand. "Thank you, Uncle Sal," she began, her voice clear and steady, carrying the authority of someone who had been raised in power but had chosen silence. "I'm honored to stand here tonight." She smiled gently at the crowd, her eyes sweeping across the ballroom. "My journey with Teresi Holdings began long before most of you knew my name. I grew up watching my father and my uncle build this empire with their hands, their hearts, and their honor." Clifford's face had gone pale. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Maria continued, "I've learned that true leadership isn't about volume. It's about vision, dignity, humility, respect. Those values build stronger foundations than any skyscraper, any contract, any deal." Her eyes swept the room again, but this time they didn't avoid Clifford. They landed on him briefly, just long enough for him to feel the weight of her gaze. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the people we overlook are the ones holding everything together. So tonight, let's toast to unseen strength, to quiet power, to the people who build empires in silence." Applause thundered through the ballroom. People rose to their feet. Cameras flashed. Clifford sat motionless, his face drained of color, his world crumbling around him. Salvatore joined Maria at the microphone, pride shining in his eyes. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen, not only is Maria my goddaughter, but as of tonight, she will be taking on the role of Vice President of International Operations for Teresi Holdings." More applause. Louder this time. Respectful. Genuine. Clifford's hands dropped to his lap. His mouth hung open slightly. The maid, the woman he had told people just helps around the house, the woman he had been too embarrassed to introduce properly, was the goddaughter of the most powerful man in the room, and she had just been given one of the highest positions in the company. Maria stepped back from the microphone, but before leaving the stage, she spoke one last time, her voice softer now, more personal. "To anyone here who has ever felt invisible, who has ever been underestimated, who has ever been told they were less than they are." She paused, her eyes glistening briefly. "You are seen. You matter. And your dignity is not determined by anyone's perception but your own." The room fell silent again. Not in shock this time, in respect. Then the applause returned, slower, deeper, more reverent. Maria descended the stage, and immediately people swarmed toward her. Congratulations poured in. Hands reached out. Business cards were offered. And across the ballroom, Clifford sat frozen, because at that moment, he realized he hadn't just lost respect. He had lost the one person who had truly seen him. And worse, he had never truly seen her at all. Clifford's body refused to move. He sat locked in his chair, as if the velvet cushion had turned to cement, his heart hammering so loud he was certain the people around him could hear it. On stage, Maria stood beside Salvatore Teresi like she had been born for that exact moment. Poised, powerful, untouchable. The same Maria who washed his shirts, who reminded him to eat lunch, who listened to his complaints without interrupting. Now, she held a microphone like it had always belonged in her hand. He swallowed hard. His throat felt like sandpaper. Around him, the room had transformed. Whispers moved like wine through expensive cologne and perfume. Eyes darted between him and the stage. Judgment without words. "That's his wife," a man at the next table murmured, his voice barely concealing disbelief. "No," another voice whispered back, sharper now. "He said she was his maid." Clifford's colleague, Marcus, a stocky man with a beard, leaned in close, his breath smelling of whiskey. "Joe, Cliff, you good, man?" Clifford didn't answer. He couldn't. His tongue felt too heavy for speech. On stage, Salvatore stood beside Maria with an expression of quiet satisfaction, like a man watching a carefully laid plan finally come to fruition. He patted her shoulder lightly, then stepped aside, giving her the space. Not as a guest, as the center. Maria's voice carried again, smooth and steady. "I know some of you expected a different face tonight. Someone more visible, someone louder. But I've learned something over the years." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd with calm authority. "The strongest pillars are often the ones you don't notice. The quietest voices often carry the most weight." Clifford's chest tightened. He felt like she could see every cruel thought he'd ever hidden behind a smile, every dismissive comment he'd made, every time he'd made her smaller to make himself feel bigger. She continued, her tone gentle but firm. "And if tonight reminds anyone here that dignity is not tied to job titles, social introductions, or how loudly you speak in a room full of strangers, then I'm grateful." A few people clapped again, slower this time, thoughtful, as if applauding a lesson they didn't want to admit they needed. Clifford's mind ran backward at dangerous speed. Every moment he'd told her to dress down, every time he'd corrected her in front of others, every time he'd said, "Don't talk too much," like her voice was a liability instead of a gift. He heard himself from earlier in the evening, standing near the champagne table, laughing with coworkers. She just helps around the house. Simple life, simple girl. The words punched him again, harder this time. When Maria finished her speech, the band resumed with a gentle instrumental, a sound meant to smooth the edges of shock. Salvatore leaned toward her and said something that made her smile briefly. Small, private, controlled. Then she turned and stepped down from the stage. The crowd shifted like a tide, pulling toward the moon. People stood, pivoting to catch her path. Several guests moved toward her immediately, hands outstretched, eager to be near power now that it had been revealed. "Maria, that was incredible. I had no idea you were involved with the firm at this level. Your perspective is so refreshing. We need more voices like yours in leadership. Are you really Mr. Teresi's goddaughter? How long have you been advising the company?" Maria navigated them with grace, answering politely without giving too much. She didn't cling to attention, but she didn't shrink from it either. She simply existed in it, naturally, like someone who had always known how to carry weight without letting it crush her. And then she was walking toward Clifford's section of the room. For one brief, desperate second, Clifford thought she might stop. Speak to him. Give him a chance to explain, to apologize, to beg. But she didn't. She passed close enough that he caught the faint scent of her perfume, something soft and clean, jasmine and vanilla. And still, she didn't look at him. Not even a glance. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. That hurt more than any insult could have. Marcus slapped Clifford's shoulder lightly, half joking, half stunned. "Bro, your wife is a whole boss. You knew about this." Clifford's voice cracked when he finally spoke. "I didn't know." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You didn't know, or you didn't ask?" Clifford flinched like he'd been slapped. Across the table, Lydia, The woman with the pearl earrings who had spoken kindly to Maria earlier looked at Clifford with quiet disgust. Not dramatic, just disappointed. You introduced her as house elf, Lydia said plainly, like stating a fact in a courtroom. Clifford's face burned. It wasn't, but there was no way to finish that sentence without sounding worse. Vincent Calabrese, the senior partner who had already dismissed Clifford once tonight, leaned closer from the adjacent table. His voice was low, calm, and final. "Clifford, you know what the problem is," Vincent said, his eyes hard but not unkind. "It's not that you didn't know who she was. It's that you were comfortable making her small." Clifford stared at him, breathing shallowly, each inhale feeling like broken glass. Vincent straightened his jacket and walked away, the conversation already over in his mind. Clifford finally pushed his chair back and stood, unsteady, his hands trembling. He scanned the room for Maria, his gaze frantic now, desperate. He saw her near Salvatore, speaking with two older investors, both men in expensive suits who nodded respectfully as she spoke. She smiled politely, her body language open but controlled. Salvatore said something in her ear, and she laughed softly, a sound Clifford realized he hadn't heard in months. Maybe longer. Clifford took a step forward. Another. His heart hammered as if trying to escape his chest. He had to speak to her. How to fix this. How to prove he wasn't the man he'd been all night. Except he was. He reached the small group, forcing a smile that felt like a broken mask slipping off his face. "Maria," he said softly, his voice cracking. "Can we talk? Please." Maria turned her head slightly. Her expression didn't change. No anger, no triumph, just composure that felt colder than ice. "Clifford," she said, as if greeting a distant acquaintance. Salvatore's smile faded. His gaze landed on Clifford like a physical weight, heavy and deliberate. The two older investors took a small step back, sensing the shift in temperature. "Clifford," Salvatore repeated, his tone suggesting he remembered every report, every complaint, every small arrogance he'd overlooked because Clifford had delivered results. "You need something?" Clifford swallowed, his mouth dry. "Sir, I didn't know. I didn't know Maria was important." The word hung in the air like a confession. Salvatore's eyebrow raised slowly. "Important?" he repeated, his voice dangerously calm. "She wasn't important before tonight?" Clifford froze, realizing the trap he'd walked into. Maria spoke before he could drown further. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Uncle, give us a moment." Salvatore studied her face, then Clifford's. His jaw tightened, but after a long pause, he gave a slow nod. 2 minutes, he said, his voice calm, but the warning was crystal clear. "Then you rejoin the family, nipot, niece." He walked away, but not before giving Clifford one last look that said everything words couldn't. The two investors followed, leaving Clifford and Maria in a small pocket of space that felt suddenly colder, more exposed. Clifford leaned closer, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Maria, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say you were connected to the Teresi family?" Maria's eyes held as steady, unflinching. "Why didn't you ask?" He blinked rapidly. Of course I asked. I asked about your day. I asked." "No," she cut in gently, but the word landed like a hammer. "You asked about your day. You talked at me. You told me what you needed. You never asked who I was." Clifford's throat tightened. "I love you, Maria." Maria's gaze didn't soften. Love without respect becomes permission. Clifford. Permission to hurt. Permission to diminish. Permission to use. He winced as if physically struck. I was under pressure tonight, he said quickly, words tumbling out. I wanted to impress them. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't mean to. Clifford, Maria interrupted, her voice still calm, but each word landing with surgical precision. You didn't mean to humiliate me, yet you did it easily, naturally, like it cost you nothing. That's the part that hurts. His eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I swear I didn't. Maria glanced past him at the room, at the people still watching, pretending not to. She lowered her voice further. This is not the place for a scene. You wanted to be respected in this room, remember? Then behave like someone worthy of it. Clifford's shoulders sagged, his body deflating. What do I do? Maria studied him for a long second, her face unreadable. Then she spoke, her words chosen carefully. You leave. Early. Not as punishment. As protection for yourself. Because the longer you stay, the more you'll embarrass yourself trying to repair something you broke with such ease. His lips trembled. Are you coming with me? Maria's answer was immediate, quiet, and final. No. Clifford felt the ground tilt beneath him. Maria, please. She took a slow breath, her composure never breaking. Go home, Clifford. We'll talk there. But not here. Not now. He clung to that small mercy like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Okay. Yes. We'll talk at home. Maria stepped back smoothly, turning as another guest approached her with a smile and an outstretched hand. In one fluid motion, she became host Maria again. Professional, graceful, untouchable. Clifford stood there, suddenly invisible, watching the room shift away from him like he was no longer worth the effort of attention. And for the first time that night, he understood viscerally what it felt like to be made small. Clifford drove home alone, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. The city lights blurred through his windshield, not because the road was unclear, but because his eyes kept watering and he refused to wipe them. He wanted to feel the sting. He deserved it. The radio played softly, some jazz station, but he couldn't hear it over the roar of his own thoughts. Over and over, he replayed the moment. Maria on stage, the Don's hand on her shoulder, the applause, the way she had looked right through him. Benedetta Maria Teresi. He hadn't even known her full name. 3 years of marriage, and he'd never asked. At home, the apartment felt too quiet. He couldn't sit. He paced the living room, still in his tuxedo, tie loosened, jacket thrown over the couch like a defeated flag. He replayed Maria's words in his mind. You didn't ask who I was. But he had asked, hadn't he? He'd asked what she cooked for dinner, whether she'd paid the electricity bill, why she was so quiet lately. He stopped pacing. Those weren't questions about her. Those were questions about the version of her that served his life, the version that made him comfortable. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. The door opened an hour later. Maria stepped in quietly, heels in hand, moving with the kind of deliberate silence that suggested she didn't want to disturb the air itself. She looked tired, not physically exhausted, but emotionally depleted, as if carrying disappointment had weight that even her strength couldn't fully bear. Clifford rushed toward her. Maria. She lifted a hand, stopping him mid-step. Not yet. He froze. She placed her heels neatly by the wall, then set her clutch on the small table near the door. Her movements were careful, controlled, like a woman who had learned not to let emotion knock things over. Clifford's voice came out rough, desperate. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." Maria looked at him, and for a brief moment he saw something flicker in her eyes. Sadness, maybe, or memory. Then it steadied into something harder. "It's late," she said quietly. "Seat." He obeyed immediately, perching on the edge of the couch like a student in trouble. Maria remained standing, her arms crossed loosely, her posture straight. "You want to know why I didn't tell you?" she said. "So I'll tell you. But you'll listen, not interrupt, not defend. Just listen." Clifford nodded quickly. "Yes, I'll listen." Maria drew in a slow breath, gathering herself. "Before I met you, I had a different life." He stared, his full attention locked on her. "I studied law," she continued. "International property law. I worked with a firm abroad for several years. Not because I wanted to prove anything, but because it interested me. Contracts, ethics, land rights, foreign investment structures. The things that shape cities and governments." Clifford's mouth opened slightly. He had never heard any of this. Maria's voice stayed even, almost detached, as if she were recounting someone else's story. "My mother got very sick, and I came home. I stepped away from that world because my mother didn't have anyone else. I became her caregiver." Clifford swallowed hard, shame rising in his throat. "Why didn't you ever?" Her eyes sharpened. He shut his mouth. "For 2 years, my life was hospitals, medication schedules, long nights, and the kind of quiet grief you don't talk about at parties." She paused, her fingers tightening slightly around her own wrist. "When she died, I felt empty, like I had served my purpose, and now I didn't know where to put myself." Clifford's eyes stung. He had known her mother died, but he'd never asked what it did to her. He'd only said sorry and moved on because grief made him uncomfortable. Maria continued, her voice steady. "Around that time, Uncle Salvatore reached out. He had mentored me since I was young, after my father died. He offered help, opportunities, but I wasn't ready. I wanted a normal life for a while. Something quiet, something that felt like mine." Her gaze landed on Clifford, and he felt it like a spotlight. "That's when I met you." Clifford's chest tightened. "At the community center," he whispered, remembering. Maria nodded. "You were volunteering because your company required community service hours. You were frustrated the whole time, but you still carried boxes and smiled when people watched. I noticed that. I thought you were trying." Clifford flinched. "You were kind to me then," she said softly. "You were gentle. You listened. You asked me real questions. You made me laugh when I hadn't laughed in months." Clifford's eyes filled completely now, tears spilling over. "I was real," he whispered. "I was real with you." "I believe you were," Maria replied, her voice not unkind. "But somewhere along the way, you changed." She walked toward the window, looking out at the dark city beyond. "When we married, I didn't mention my past because I didn't want it to become the center of our relationship. I wanted to be loved without the weight of credentials, without people treating me differently because of status or a family name." Clifford's voice trembled. "So you tested me." Maria turned slowly. "I observed you." He nodded desperately. "And I failed." Maria's silence was answer enough. Clifford's head dropped into his hands. "I didn't know you were involved with Teresi Holdings. I didn't know you advised on international deals. I didn't know. At first, I wasn't involved." Maria interrupted quietly. "But Uncle Salvatore would call sometimes. Ask my opinion on ethics clauses, foreign partner structures, risk assessment. Small advice. Quiet conversations. Clifford looked up, shocked. All those nights you said you were reading. I was working, Maria confirmed. I started investing again. Slowly. Not to compete with you. Not to shame you. Just to rebuild myself. Clifford's voice cracked. In a lower Manhattan expansion deal. Maria's eyes held his. I advised on parts of it. I flagged legal issues early. I suggested safeguards that protected the family from liability. That's why Uncle Salvatore said I played a role. Clifford's hands covered his face. God, Maria's voice lowered, becoming almost tender in its honesty. You know what's painful, Clifford? It's not that you didn't know I had accomplishments. It's that you assumed I didn't. You assumed my quiet meant emptiness. My simplicity meant ignorance. My kindness meant weakness. Clifford's shoulders shook. I was insecure, he whispered through his hands. I didn't want them to look down on me. Maria stepped closer, her voice soft but devastating. So you made me someone they could look down on instead. The room went silent except for the sound of Clifford's ragged breathing. I hate myself for that, he finally said, his voice small and broken. Maria watched him, her face still unreadable. Then she spoke, not cruelly, but truthfully. I don't need you to hate yourself, Clifford. I need you to see yourself. He wiped his face with trembling hands. Tell me what to do. Please. Maria exhaled slowly, tiredly. You stop performing. You stop using other people as props to feel big. He nodded rapidly. Yes, I will. And you learn respect, she added, her voice firming slightly. Not because you're scared of losing me, but because without it, you can't love anyone properly. Clifford swallowed hard. The question he'd been afraid to ask finally escaped. Are you leaving me? Maria held his gaze for a long time. In that pause, Clifford felt every possible future collapse and rebuild itself. I don't know, she said finally. I'm not making dramatic decisions tonight. I am tired. Relief and fear tangled in him, creating something that felt like nausea. Okay. Maria walked toward the hallway, then stopped at the threshold, her back still to him. One more thing. Clifford looked up quickly, desperately. Yes. This. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I didn't expect to be humiliated tonight. I expected maybe discomfort, maybe awkwardness. I didn't expect you to choose cruelty so easily. Clifford's face crumpled. Maria, She raised a hand again, not turning around. Sleep, Clifford. And with that, she walked down the hallway, leaving him in the living room with his tuxedo, his shame, and the version of himself he could no longer pretend wasn't real. The next morning, Clifford woke to silence that felt heavier than noise. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, bright and ordinary, as if the world hadn't cracked open the night before. He sat up slowly, disoriented, then remembered everything at once. The gala, the stage, the applause, the way Maria had looked through him like he was air. He stepped into the hallway and found the guest room door closed. Maria, he called softly. No answer. In the kitchen, he found a mug on the counter, still warm, and the kettle recently used. She made tea earlier and left without announcing herself. He looked around, searching for signs of normal life. Music, cooking smells, her humming while she prepared breakfast. There was nothing. He checked his phone. Messages from colleagues flooded in. Marcus, Joman. That was wild last night. You good? Another co-worker. Hope you're okay. That was intense. Vincent Calabrese. FYI, Mr. Teresi wants a departmental meeting Monday morning. Be prepared. Clifford's stomach nodded. He tried calling Maria's phone. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. He sent a text instead. Can we talk when you're ready? I'm here. An hour passed. Then two. Maria finally emerged from the guest room, dressed simply in a white blouse and dark trousers, her hair pulled back neatly in a low bun. She didn't look like host Maria from last night. She didn't look like house Maria from before. She looked like herself. Quiet power, quiet distance. Clifford stood immediately. Good morning. Maria nodded once. Morning. He swallowed. I made coffee. Thank you, she said, and poured herself a cup without looking at him. He hovered awkwardly, hands opening and closing at his sides. Are you going to work today? Yes. I can drive you. No. The single word landed like a door slamming shut. Clifford's hands clenched. Maria, please. I know you're hurt, but shutting me out. She set her cup down gently, the porcelain clicking softly against the counter. Clifford, I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting my peace. He blinked. So you're just done talking? Maria's gaze lifted, calm and direct. We talked last night. You heard me. I heard you. I heard you, he said quickly. And I want to fix it. Wanting isn't fixing, she replied simply. Clifford's voice rose slightly, desperation leaking out. I can change. Just tell me how. Maria's expression remained steady. Then change. He took a step closer. Tell me what you need from me. Maria's eyes softened just a fraction, but her voice stayed firm. I need space to breathe without feeling like I'm responsible for your growth. Clifford's throat tightened. You're my wife, and I'm a person, she said quietly. Not your mirror, not your coach, not your emotional crutch. He flinched as if struck. I didn't know I was doing that, he said weakly. Maria picked up her phone and keys from the counter. That's the problem, Clifford. You didn't know because you didn't look. Clifford followed her toward the door, panic rising in his chest like floodwater. Are you leaving me? Maria paused, her hand on the doorknob. She turned her head slightly, not quite looking at him. I'm leaving this conversation for now. That's all I'm promising you. He swallowed hard. Where are you going? To the office, she replied. Torrisi Holdings. Clifford's chest tightened again, reality still sharp and cutting. Are people talking about me? Maria looked back at him fully now, her expression neither pitying nor cruel, just honest. Clifford, they're not obsessed with you. They're obsessed with results and character. Last night wasn't about you being embarrassed. It was about you revealing yourself. His eyes dropped to the floor. I'm sorry, he whispered. Maria's voice softened slightly. I know you are. Hope sparked in him, dangerous and desperate. Does that mean? It means I believe your regret is real, she interrupted gently. But regret without growth becomes another performance. Clifford nodded, swallowing tears. I'll do the work. I promise. Maria studied him for a long moment. Do it for yourself, Clifford, because if you don't learn respect when nobody is watching, then it isn't respect. It's fear. He breathed out shakily. Okay. Maria opened the door. Before she stepped out, she added, and Clifford. He looked up quickly. Yes. Don't try to contact Uncle Salvatore. Don't try to explain yourself to your colleagues. Don't do damage control. He frowned, confused. Why not? Because it won't be about truth, Maria replied. It will be about your image. And your image is the very thing that made you cruel. Clifford's shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. I understand, he said quietly. Maria nodded once and stepped out. The door closed behind her with a quiet finality that made the apartment feel twice as empty. Clifford stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, listening to the silence press in around him. Then slowly, he pulled out his phone and searched. Therapist near me, Queens, New York. He didn't overthink it, didn't rehearse how he would sound. He just booked the earliest appointment available. Would you have waited or struck back immediately? Later that morning, when Clifford arrived at work, the atmosphere felt different. Not hostile. Worse. Polite. Controlled. Like everyone had silently agreed to treat him like a man carrying something unpleasant that nobody wanted to touch. Marcus approached him near the elevator bank with an awkward half-smile. "Joe, Cliff. You good?" Clifford nodded stiffly. "I'm fine." Marcus's smile faded. "Look, man, no disrespect, but you messed up big time last night." Clifford didn't argue. "I know." Marcus studied his face, surprised by the lack of defensiveness. "You really didn't know she was connected?" Clifford's voice was low, honest. "I didn't know her. Not the way I should have." Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the honesty. "Damn, that's deep, bro." Clifford stepped into the elevator alone. His reflection in the mirrored wall stared back at him. Tired eyes, stiff posture, a man who had spent years acting like someone else. For the first time, he didn't try to straighten his face in a false confidence. He just looked, and when the elevator doors opened on his floor, he walked out quieter than he'd ever been. Not defeated, not dramatic, just aware. Because now he understood that the real work wasn't winning Maria back. It was becoming the kind of man who would never again need to make someone smaller just to feel big. The therapy session that evening stripped Clifford down in ways he didn't expect. The therapist, Dr. Harris, was a calm black woman in her 50s who didn't let him hide behind big words or corporate jargon. Within 10 minutes, Clifford realized how much he talked when he was scared. He tried to explain the gala, his job, the pressure, the image he had to maintain, the way people judged. He tried to make it sound complicated, layered, understandable. Dr. Harris leaned forward slightly, her pen resting on her notepad. "Why did you choose to humiliate her instead of saying, 'This is my wife'?" Clifford stared at the floor, his hands gripping his knees. Because I didn't want them to judge me." "So you offered her up to be judged instead," Dr. Harris said gently, without accusation. "Why?" Clifford's throat tightened. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound died in his chest. "Because it felt safer." "Safer for whom?" "For me," Clifford whispered. Dr. Harris paused, letting the quiet do its work. Then she asked the question that would follow him for months. "When did you learn that safety comes from making someone else smaller?" Clifford sat with that question long after the session ended. He thought about his father, how his father used to adjust his cheap tie in the mirror every morning and say, "If you don't look important, nobody will respect you. Poor men must act rich, or they will be stepped on." He thought about how, as a boy, he would watch his father laugh too loudly in rooms full of men who didn't take him seriously, and how his father would come home angry, kicking at chairs, blaming the world for not seeing his worth. Clifford drove home that afternoon and saw Maria walking out of the Teresi Holdings building lobby with a colleague, a tall woman in a burgundy suit. Maria was laughing at something the woman said, confident, relaxed, speaking as if she belonged anywhere she chose to stand. Clifford didn't call out. He watched from his parked car for a moment, then looked away, ashamed, like he didn't deserve to witness her joy. That evening, Rain started unexpectedly, heavy and stubborn, drumming against the windows. Clifford found himself back at the Teresi Holdings building for a brief department meeting his supervisor had called. He walked out afterward feeling smaller than he'd ever felt at work. Not because anyone insulted him, but because nobody tried to comfort his pride. They spoke to him like a man who had revealed poor character. And now the only way forward was consistent improvement. Not explanation, not excuses. In the lobby, he saw Maria again. This time she was alone, standing near the entrance, waiting as Blacktown cars and Ubers pulled up in the rain. She looked tired, not broken, just human. Clifford hesitated, then stepped forward carefully. Maria. She turned her head. Clifford. It's raining, he said, stating the obvious. Your driver. Is he coming? He's stuck in traffic, Maria replied. She didn't sound helpless, just stating a fact. Clifford swallowed. Can I drive you home? Maria's eyes searched his face. Not for charm, not for manipulation, for intention. Clifford held still, forcing himself not to talk too much, not to perform. After a moment, Maria nodded once. Okay. The word landed like a fragile bridge between them. Clifford opened the passenger door for her, the rain already soaking his shoulders. Maria stepped in without comment. Clifford shut the door gently, then walked around to the driver's side, heart pounding like he had just been given a chance he didn't deserve. Inside the car, silence settled immediately. Rain hammered the roof. The wipers cut through the water in steady, rhythmic sweeps. Clifford drove slowly, carefully, like sudden movement might scare something precious away. He wanted to speak. His mouth opened twice, then closed. He remembered what Maria had said. Don't sell your effort like a product. Minutes passed. Maria stared out the window, her face calm but distant. Street lights smeared into gold streaks on the wet pavement. Clifford's hands tightened on the wheel. I'm learning things, he said quietly, testing the air. In therapy. Maria didn't look at him. Good. Clifford's throat tightened. The therapist asked me something. She asked when I learned that safety comes from making someone else smaller. Maria's eyes shifted slightly, not toward him, but as if she heard the weight behind the sentence. Clifford's voice grew rougher, more honest, and I realized I've been doing that for years. Not just with you, with people at work, with anyone I thought could make me look weak. Maria's face remained composed. And what did you decide to do with that realization? Clifford swallowed. Sit with it. Not defend myself, not explain it away, just sit with the ugliness of it. Maria finally turned her head a little, studying him. That's new. Clifford nodded, eyes burning. I am sorry, Maya. Truly. She didn't respond immediately. The rain filled the gap, a sound that felt like the world exhaling. Then Maria spoke, her voice soft but clear. Clifford, do you know what hurt the most at the gala? Clifford's breath caught. Tell me. It wasn't the words, she said. It was your ease. The way you said it, like it was normal. Like it didn't cost you anything to reduce me. Clifford's eyes flooded. He blinked hard, focusing on the road through blurred vision. It did cost me, he whispered. I just didn't feel it until it was too late. Maria watched him for a second longer, then looked back out the window. That's the tragedy of arrogance, she said quietly. It numbs you before it destroys something. They drove the rest of the way in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't punishment. It was space where something honest had finally been placed on the table without drama. When they reached the apartment building, Clifford parked and turned off the engine. The rain had softened to a drizzle. Maria unbuckled her seatbelt. Her hand rested briefly on the door handle. Then she paused. Clifford didn't move. He waited. Maria spoke without looking at him. "Thank you for the ride." Clifford's voice cracked. "You're welcome." Maria stepped out of the car, walked toward the building, then stopped and turned slightly. "Clifford." He looked up quickly, hope and fear warring in his chest. "Don't confuse small progress with finished work," she said. "But keep going." Then she went inside. Clifford sat in the car after she left, staring at the steering wheel as tears finally fell. Not loud sobs, just quiet release. Because for the first time since the gala, he felt something real. Not hope of getting Maria back quickly, but the beginning of becoming a man who didn't need to borrow dignity by stealing it from someone else. The next several months were the hardest of Clifford's life, not because they were dramatic, but because they were relentlessly honest. Therapy wasn't a quick fix. It was uncomfortable. It was slow. It was sitting in a chair while Dr. Harris asked questions that felt like lights turning on in rooms he'd kept locked for decades. At home, Maria kept her distance with discipline. She wasn't cruel. She didn't shout or throw his mistakes at him. She simply stopped cushioning him from consequences. Clifford noticed the absence of small kindnesses. Maria used to automatically refill his water bottle, remind him of meetings, ask if he'd eaten even when she hadn't. Now she moved through the apartment like a woman protecting her energy, her peace, herself. And Clifford realized how much he had been living off her quiet labor without calling it what it was, service he'd taken for granted. Dr. Harris assigned him weekly volunteering, not for public image or guilt relief, but to practice seeing people without ranking them. Clifford chose the same community center where he'd first met Maria. On his first day back, he wore simple clothes and tried to stay unnoticed. The coordinator, an older woman named Mrs. Chun, handed him cleaning gloves. "Bathroom duty," she said flatly. "If you're too important for that, tell me now so I can give the gloves to someone else." Clifford's cheeks burned. The old one would have smiled and found an excuse. This time he nodded. "I'll do it." He scrubbed floors and cleaned sinks until his back ached. Nobody praised him. Nobody called him sir. He went home that night, exhausted and strangely humbled. When he mentioned to Maria that he'd started volunteering again, she didn't clap or soften. She just nodded and said, "Good." At first, Clifford wanted her to notice more, wanted her to say, "I'm proud of you." Then he started noticing something uncomfortable about himself. He had built his whole life on being rewarded for basic decency, so he learned to do the work without expecting a prize. Meanwhile, Maria moved forward with her own life. Clifford saw it from a distance, a respectful distance. Her schedule changed. Her wardrobe shifted slightly toward more professional pieces. Her posture became even more grounded. She took calls in the living room sometimes, her voice calm and authoritative. She wasn't trying to intimidate him. She was simply stepping back into herself, reclaiming the space she had given up to make their marriage comfortable for him. One evening, Maria came home and placed a folder on the dining table. Clifford's body tensed automatically, remembering old moments where papers meant control, meant conflict. Maria spoke calmly. "Uncle Salvatore wants me to lead a mentorship program for young women entering the real estate and law industries." Clifford nodded carefully. "That's amazing, Maria. You'll be incredible at it." Maria studied him for a second. "You don't sound threatened." Clifford swallowed, then chose honesty. I am, he admitted quietly, but I'm trying to sit with it instead of turning it into something ugly. Maria's face softened slightly, not into forgiveness, but into recognition of effort. That's growth, she said. Clifford's throat tightened. He wanted to rush toward her, wanted to beg, wanted to hold onto that word like it meant he was saved. But he stayed still. He let it be what it was. A small acknowledgement, not absolution. Weeks turned into months. The apartment became less tense, though not intimate. Maria sometimes shared small updates. Nothing deeply personal, but not cold either. Clifford learned to respond without trying to steer the conversation back to himself. One Saturday afternoon, Clifford found out Maria was speaking at a professional conference on ethics in real estate investment. His first instinct was to show up, make himself visible, prove he supported her. Then he remembered, support isn't a spotlight. So he attended quietly. He sat in the back row in simple clothes, hands folded, listening. Maria stood on stage, her voice calm and powerful, speaking about dignity in business, transparency, how people hide behind titles to excuse harm. Clifford felt every word like it was aimed at his old self. And he didn't flinch. He listened. He learned. When the event ended, people clustered around Maria, praising her insight, asking for business cards, requesting follow-up meetings. Clifford didn't approach. He didn't want to steal even a second of her moment. He left quietly, walked outside into the cool spring air, and sat in his car with his chest tight. He pulled out a small card from his wallet, wrote slowly and carefully, and left it with the front desk attendant to give to Maria. The note read, I'm learning not to win you back, but to become someone worthy of loving. He drove home before she arrived. When Maria got home later that evening, she held the note in her hand for a long time. Clifford watched her from across the living room, afraid to speak, afraid to hope. Maria finally looked up. Her eyes were softer than he'd seen in a long time. She didn't say anything immediately. She simply placed the note carefully into the book she'd been reading, like it mattered, like she was keeping it. For the first time in months, she smiled. Not big, not dramatic, just a quiet lift at the corner of her mouth, like a woman allowing herself one small moment of hope. Clifford's breath caught. Maria set the book down on the side table and walked toward the kitchen. Have you eaten? She asked, her voice neutral but not cold. It was the first time in months she'd asked him that question. Clifford's voice was soft. Not yet. I'm making pasta, she said. There's enough for two if you want. It wasn't an invitation to reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a door left slightly open. Clifford nodded, his throat tight with gratitude he didn't dare voice. Thank you. They ate together that night in careful silence. Not the heavy silence of anger, but the quiet of two people learning how to exist in the same space again without performing. When Maria stood to clear the dishes, Clifford stood too. Let me help. She paused, then nodded. Okay. They washed dishes side by side, not touching, not speaking, just moving in a rhythm that felt like the beginning of something new. Or maybe the slow, painful rebuilding of something broken. 6 months after the gala, Teresi Holdings hosted another formal event. This time, it was a charity dinner for Italian-American cultural preservation, held at an elegant venue in Brooklyn. Maria's name was printed clearly on the program as Vice President of International Operations and Event Coordinator. Guests arrived with the same polished smiles, the same expensive perfume, the same hunger for relevance and connection to power. Clifford attended too, but not as a man chasing attention, not as someone performing importance. He sat quietly in the middle of the room, dressed in a simple dark suit, his posture calm, his expectations realistic. When Maria walked onto the stage to give opening remarks, the room shifted toward her like gravity. She spoke with the same composure, the same steady strength, the same quiet authority that had shocked everyone 6 months prior. She didn't mention Clifford. She didn't need to. Her dignity didn't require public proof or validation. Clifford watched her with a quiet pride that didn't come from being associated with her success, but from finally understanding what it meant to honor someone without trying to own their shine. When the applause rose, Clifford clapped too, not loudly to be noticed, not performatively, but sincerely, the way you applaud someone you genuinely respect. During the dinner, several colleagues approached Clifford. Their tones had changed over the months. Less mocking, more curious, some even respectful in a cautious way. "You and Maria good?" Marcus asked, sitting down beside him with a plate of food. Clifford considered the question carefully. "We're working on it. She's given me a chance to grow. That's more than I deserve." Marcus nodded slowly. "That's real, man. That's real." Later in the evening, as people mingled and the band played soft music, Salvatore Teresi approached Clifford's table. Clifford's body tensed automatically, old fear rising. But he forced himself to remain seated, to not jump up like a nervous employee. "Mr. Teresi," Clifford said respectfully, standing then but without the desperate energy of before. Salvatore studied him for a long moment, those sharp eyes that had witnessed decades of men trying to hide who they really were. "Walk with me," Salvatore said. It wasn't a request. Clifford followed him out onto a quieter terrace overlooking the Brooklyn waterfront. The city lights reflected off the dark water, and the sounds of the party faded behind them. Salvatore lit a cigar, the smoke curling up into the night air. He didn't offer one to Clifford. "Another test, perhaps." "You embarrass my goddaughter," Salvatore said finally, his voice calm but heavy. "In front of my family. In front of people who respect her." Clifford's throat tightened. "Yes, sir. I did." "Why?" Clifford could have made excuses, could have blamed pressure, misunderstanding, ignorance. But he learned something in the past 6 months. "Because I was more concerned with how I looked than who she was," Clifford said quietly. "I used her to make myself feel bigger. And that was wrong." Salvatore took a slow drag of his cigar, exhaling smoke into the night. "You know what we do to men who disrespect this family?" Clifford's heart hammered. "Yes, sir." "Then you know you're lucky," Salvatore said, his eyes sharp. "Lucky that Maria asked me to give you space. Lucky that she sees something in you worth saving." Clifford nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know." Salvatore turned to face him fully. "I built this family on respect, on loyalty, on understanding that power without honor is just violence. You understand that now." "I'm learning, sir," Clifford said honestly. "Every day." Salvatore studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Maria tells me you've been doing the work. Therapy, volunteering, staying quiet when you used to perform." Clifford blinked, surprised Maria had spoken to her uncle about him. "She still loves you," Salvatore said, his voice softer now. "God knows why, but she does. And because she loves you, I haven't ended your career or worse." Clifford swallowed hard. "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Salvatore's eyes narrowed. "Because if you hurt her again, Clifford, There won't be a third chance. Not from her, and certainly not from me. The threat was clear. Not dramatic, not loud, just certain. I won't hurt her again, Clifford said, and he meant it with everything in him. Salvatore took another drag, then dropped the cigar and crushed it under his expensive shoe. Then prove it. Not with words, with years. He walked past Clifford back toward the party, then paused at the door. And Clifford, yes, sir, start calling her by her full name. Benedetta Maria Teresi. She earned it. Respect it. Yes, sir. Salvatore disappeared inside, leaving Clifford alone on the terrace with the weight of accountability and the strange gift of a second chance. When Clifford returned inside, he found Maria speaking with a group of young women, all of them listening intently as she explained something about contract negotiations. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched from a distance, seeing her truly for perhaps the first time since they'd met. Not as his wife, not as his accessory, not as someone who existed to make his life easier, but as Benedetta Maria Teresi, a woman with her own power, her own legacy, her own story that had nothing to do with him. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Maria found Clifford near the coat check. "Ready to go?" she asked. "Whenever you are," Clifford replied. They walked to the car together, not holding hands but side by side, a comfortable distance that felt earned rather than forced. In the car, as Clifford drove them home through the Brooklyn streets, Maria spoke quietly. "Uncle Sal talked to you tonight." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Clifford said. "He reminded me what's at stake." Maria looked out the window. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth," Clifford replied. "That I'm learning, that I won't hurt you again, that I'm trying to become someone worthy of the chance you're giving me." Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm not all the way back yet, Clifford. I'm not ready to return to how things were." "I don't want how things were," Clifford said honestly. "I want to build something better, something based on who we really are, not who I pretended we were." Maria turned to look at him, really look at him, searching his face in the dim light of passing street lamps. "Okay," she said finally. "We'll keep building then." It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't forgiveness complete, but it was permission to continue, to grow, to try. And for Clifford, that was everything. Do you believe in second chances after betrayal? The Sunday afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Salvatore Teresi's estate in Long Island. The sprawling property sat on 5 acres of manicured lawns, old oak trees, and gardens that Maria's late grandmother had planted decades ago. The family had gathered for Sunday dinner, a tradition Salvatore maintained religiously. The dining room tables stretched long and elegant, covered in white linen and set with fine china that had been in the Teresi family for 3 generations. Maria sat near the head of the table, on Salvatore's right. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, a small smile on her face as she listened to her cousin's wife tell a story about their youngest child. Clifford sat beside Maria, quiet but present, no longer anxious about belonging or being noticed. Over the past year, he had learned to exist in these spaces without performing, to listen more than he spoke, to respect the family dynamics without trying to force himself into a role he hadn't earned. The Teresi family had slowly, carefully let him back in, not because he demanded it, but because Maria had vouched for his growth and because he had proven day after day, month after month, that his change was real. Salvatore raised his wine glass, and the table quieted immediately. Before we eat, I want to say something. All eyes turned to the Don. Family is not just blood, Salvatore began, his voice carrying that familiar weight of authority and wisdom. Family is loyalty, respect, the willingness to grow when you've been wrong, and the grace to forgive when others have failed you. His eyes moved around the table, landing briefly on Maria, then on Clifford. This past year, I've watched two people rebuild something that was broken. Not quickly, not easily, but honestly. He lifted his glass higher, to growth, to respect, to second chances earned through action, not words. Salute. The table echoed, glasses raising. Clifford met Maria's eyes across the table. She smiled at him, a real smile, warm and genuine, the kind she used to give him when they first met. He smiled back, his heart full in a way it hadn't been in years. After dinner, as people moved to the garden for espresso and conversation, Maria and Clifford found themselves walking alone along a stone path lined with rose bushes. Maria's hand brushed against his, and this time Clifford took it gently. She didn't pull away. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up on me when you had every reason to." Maria stopped walking and turned to face him. "I didn't stay for you, Clifford. I stayed for me, because I wanted to see if the man I fell in love with was still in there somewhere." "And," Clifford asked, his voice vulnerable, "is he?" Maria studied his face, her expression thoughtful. "He's there. Older now. More aware. More humble." She paused. "Better." Clifford's eyes filled with emotion. "I love you, Benedetta Maria Torrisi. All of you. The quiet parts and the powerful parts. The gentle and the fierce. I see now. All of you." Maria's eyes glistened. "I love you too. But Clifford, if you ever make me feel small again." "I won't," he interrupted gently. "I swear on everything I am, I won't." She searched his face one more time, then nodded. "Okay." She leaned forward and kissed him softly, a kiss that felt like forgiveness and new beginnings and hard-won trust all wrapped together. When they pulled apart, they continued walking hand in hand through the garden, the late afternoon sun casting golden light through the leaves, and for the first time in over a year, their future felt possible again. Back at the house, Salvatore stood at the window, watching them walk together. His consigliere, an older man named Vittorio, stood beside him. "You think he's really changed?" Vittorio asked. Salvatore was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Time will tell, but Maria believes in him, and Maria is the smartest person in this family. Vittorio Chacol. She gets that from you." "No," Salvatore said, his voice soft with affection and pride. "She gets that from her father, and from surviving loss and choosing grace anyway." He turned from the window. "That's real strength. Not the kind you show in a boardroom. The kind you live with every day." Vittorio nodded in agreement. Salvatore took one last look at Maria and Clifford in the garden, then smiled. "She'll be fine, with or without him. But if he's smart, he'll spend the rest of his life making sure it's with him." 3 years later, Maria and Clifford stood together in a newly renovated community center in Queens, the same one where they had first met. But this time, they weren't volunteers fulfilling corporate requirements. They were donors, partners, founders of a new program providing free legal aid and business mentorship to immigrant families trying to build lives in New York. The center's walls were painted warm colors. Children's artwork hung in frames. Tables were filled with families receiving help with housing contracts, business licenses, citizenship applications. Maria stood at a small podium, addressing the crowd gathered for the center's grand reopening. My father used to tell me that power is only meaningful if it serves something greater than yourself, she began, her voice steady and sure. Today, we honor his memory and the memory of all the families who built this city with their hands and their hope. Clifford stood off to the side, not on stage, not in the spotlight, but close enough to support her if she needed it. He'd learned where he belonged, beside her, not in front of her. When Maria finished speaking, the crowd applauded. She stepped down, and Clifford handed her a bottle of water without being asked. "Thank you," she said, smiling at him. "Always," he replied. An elderly woman approached them, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for what you're doing here. My grandson needs help with his business permit. We didn't know where to go." Maria took the woman's hands in hers. "You're in the right place now. We'll help him. That's what we're here for." As the woman walked away to speak with one of the volunteer lawyers, Clifford put his arm around Maria's shoulders. "You've built something beautiful here," he said. Maria leaned into him slightly. "We built it together." Clifford shook his head gently. "No, you built it. I just finally learned how to support you properly." Maria looked up at him, her eyes warm. "That's growth, Clifford. And growth is beautiful too." They stood together, watching families receive help, watching hope take root, watching their partnership create something that mattered beyond themselves. And in that moment, Clifford understood what Maria had tried to teach him years ago at the Gala. True power isn't about being seen. It's about what you build when nobody's watching. It's about lifting others instead of standing on them. It's about respect, given freely and earned daily. It's about love that makes both people bigger, never smaller. On a quiet evening 5 years after the Gala, Maria and Clifford sat on the terrace of their new apartment in Brooklyn Heights, overlooking the city skyline. The apartment was modest by Teresi family standards, but it was theirs, filled with books and photographs and memories they were building together. Maria had been promoted to senior vice president at Teresi Holdings. Clifford had moved to a different company, starting over in a smaller role, rebuilding his career on merit rather than proximity to power. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They still had disagreements. They still triggered old wounds occasionally. But they had learned how to repair, how to apologize, how to grow together instead of apart. Maria rested her head on Clifford's shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "Do you ever think about that night?" Clifford asked quietly. "The Gala." Maria was silent for a moment. "Sometimes, not with anger anymore. More like remembering a storm we survived." Clifford nodded. "I'm sorry it happened, but I'm grateful for what it taught me." "What did it teach you?" Clifford thought carefully. "That loving someone means honoring them, especially when nobody's watching. That my worth isn't measured by other people's approval. That the person sleeping next to me is the only audience that matters." Maria lifted her head and kissed his cheek. "Good answer." He smiled. "I've had good teachers." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell over the city. Two people who had broken and rebuilt, who had learned that love isn't about perfection, but about choosing each other again and again, with respect and honesty and grace. And somewhere across the city, in his estate on Long Island, Salvatore Teresi raised a glass of wine to the photograph of his late brother, Maria's father. "She chose well after all, Giacomo," he said softly to the picture. It took time, but she chose well. She always was a strong one, just like you. The photograph, silent and still, seemed to smile back in the candlelight. The Teresi family legacy continued, built not on fear or violence, but on the quiet strength of a woman who knew her worth and the transformed love of a man who finally learned to honor it.